Good morning, I'm Kaylee Olson. I'm the Deputy Editor of Briefing, and welcome to the next in our webinar series for Briefing 5P in the run-up to our main virtual event this year on the 9th and 10th of November. Today's P is profitability. We're exploring beyond the hype, determining the right tech platform to drive law firm profitability. We've got a great group of speakers for you this morning across legal, tech, and client side. And I wanted to say a big thank you, of course, to our sponsor for today's webcast, sa.global. We have Group CEO and founder Stephen James joining us. Before I pass it over to him to kick us off this morning, just a bit of housekeeping. Recording will be published after this event, should you wish to rewatch or send around to your colleagues. And please do engage and make the most of our panel today. Ask questions in either the chat or the Q&A sections, and I'll be sure to ask the panel during our Q&A section after this. So, all right, Stephen, without further ado, why don't you kick us off this morning?
Thanks very much, Kaylee. So first of all, I've been doing this for a long time. This is 30 years of sa.global. They say that you get less than that for murder in most jurisdictions. But I think that it's interesting that we're talking today about platforms and profitability, because I feel like there's really a paradigm shift in the industry now, away from thinking about information technology in terms of efficiency and operational improvement, the kind of build a better mousetrap mentality, towards how can we leverage the technology towards competitive advantage, towards strategic advantage. And if we look at the pace at which the tools are evolving, it's absolutely incredible. I feel as though if we in the technology industry are struggling to keep up with the pace of technology change, that it's incredibly hard for those of you who are not immersed in this every single day to keep up with this. So it's a great opportunity from my point of view to talk a little bit about what I feel the paradigm shift is, and to think about not so much how technology drives efficiency, but how the right platform can really enable strategic advantage and enhanced profitability. So with that in mind, just framing it, I'd like to pass over to Craig Bird, who's going to talk a little bit about the Microsoft platform.
Thank you so much, Stephen. If you could close your video now and mute, we'll have Craig. Hello, Craig.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Craig Bird. I am a business application specialist at Microsoft. I am aligned to the professional services sector. And specifically for me, that means our enterprise legal customers. So I spend an awful lot of time with some of the large legal customers. Focus on all things Dynamics 365, which for us is our Microsoft first-party applications. Think business development, marketing, service, etc. But also our Power Platform solutions, which is our latest innovation around platform. This is a real hot topic for us in legal, and allows our customers and indeed our partner organizations to build agile line of business applications. Importantly, automate processes over existing technology, and ultimately drive insight from that data. So I've worked in, not quite as long as Steve, but in IT and software for 15 years. In that time, I've covered kind of a whole range, really. So from training, pre-sales, technical sales, solution design, project management, implementation. So really had the opportunity to kind of experience a true end-to-end of, some of the in-depth technical elements of solution architecture, but also the impact on users. And I think the impact and rollout on users and how they consume that technology is kind of key. And when we look at innovation. So yeah, really pleased to be here this morning, share some thoughts on current trends, conversations we're having at Microsoft. I guess in line with the agenda today, how can innovation in technology help firms increase, I think, importantly, client experience, but also in turn profitability. And I guess, whilst I've called out I work for Microsoft, one of the largest global tech providers, I'll start by saying, forget technology for a moment. I think for today, some of the areas that will contribute in are more outcome driven. So, some of the things that we'll hopefully be talking about are how can we unlock the data that we have already, maybe at the firm, to drive insight? And equally, what can that data tell us about our clients that we didn't already know? And how can we use that insight to then drive a next best action? I think for me, top of mind is all about, rather than seeing legal technology as just a collection of systems of record, which I think it has been for a long time, that enable us to do the day job. How can we kind of flip that? So we're talking about a platform and a system of intelligence that kind of really adds value to the firm. So yeah, again, pleased to be here and look forward to the conversation this morning. I think I'm passing over to Mike.
Yeah, I'll bring up Mike. Mike is the finance director at Field Fisher. Thanks for joining us today, Mike.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm finance director at Field Fisher. I've been there for 8 years, but spent my entire career working in professional services organizations, the last 20 years in legal. I think legal, obviously historically, has been a very, very profitable line of business. And law firms are now finding increased competition, and particularly the impact of the COVID downturn having quite a significant impact on business. Perhaps not quite as extreme as some had feared back in March, but nonetheless looking for better decision-making processes, looking for data-driven decision-making. And I think that certainly with the guys here today, looking forward to the conversations around platform, we happen to use a Microsoft platform and are finding it incredibly helpful for surfacing data. But this is really about how we drive profitability, I think, within the businesses. And it's absolutely key in my mind to have up-to-date and reliable data in order to make those decisions.
Thanks so much, Mike. And we'll see you again during the Q&A section. If you could log off, and we'll get Laila Aslam, the General Counsel and Company Secretary at Waterstones. Laila, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yes, as Kaylee said, currently General Counsel to Waterstones. Prior to that, I spent 12 years at Deloitte in their consultancy department, in the legal team within that. And a lot of my experience was actually delivering, enterprise solutions to clients, including law firms. So have a good experience of technologies. I'm not a tech expert myself, but at the moment now I'm the end user of the technology that law firms have. And, whilst I don't necessarily see how it's used in-house for them, but absolutely like to see the benefit of it at the other end. So interested in the conversation, and also, what is out there right now at the moment, what are law firms planning to do in the future, drive profitability on the one hand, but how can that sort of deliver better advice, insights to me as a customer, and a buyer of that.
Absolutely. Great. I think we'll just get on with the Q&A then. If everyone can please rejoin me, Mike, Craig, and Stephen, and we'll have some good conversation. I think there's a lot to touch on there about the intersectionality between tech and profitability, something that people don't really think about as a direct link. So it's good to hear some of your views. If everyone can unmute and join me, and we'll start Q&A. We'll just wait for everyone to get going. Laila, while everyone is joining us, why don't we start with you? Some interesting things from your side as the client is, law firms, a big thing for law firms right now is being more client focused, being more engaging with the client. From your point of view, from a general overarching theme, what do you expect from a very basic level engagement with the law firm? What do you expect in terms of service delivery, communication, the technology that they use? How can they leverage a better client relationship with you?
So I think from my perspective, it's all about, acting truly as that trusted advisor. So it's not about coming in, focusing on a deal and leaving. It's being able to drive that insight. And, we're going to talk about data and how we can derive that, because law firms have such unique insight into all organizations. So at the moment I'm in retail, so across the board, they will have experience of many retailers, that they will be able to identify trends, where the risks lie, what things we should be looking at, so that we're more proactive. And it's acting as that trusted advisor, and sort of holding our hand along that journey, as opposed to just coming in, advising on that specific thing that I've asked for, because I might not know what I'm asking for. I might not be asking the right questions. So my expectation is, we need to step that up a bit more, and, definitely provide insights, and whether it's using technology or just better client service, but it should be much more holistic. And from my experience in a consultancy, you definitely did see that. I think consultants tend to be quite at the forefront of all of this, whether it's using technology, analytics, AI, they're very much at the forefront, so they can take that and pass it on to the next client. We don't necessarily see that from law firms. It feels like it is a step behind. And, as Stephen said, traditionally, the law is behind technology, whether we're legislating for it or even adapting it and adopting it in our practices. So we're very aware of that, but I think now is the time to absolutely take that next step.
Yeah. It's interesting you should say that, because we always think about internal data and how better to leverage internal data, but the real power comes from the kind of nexus of internal data and external data. So we think about customer service. If we understand our client well, we understand the matters that we're doing for our client, we can understand the context of those matters. We can say, for example, we can already start to push information to that client. We can provide them information as far as things that are in the news around things that concern them. Let's say that it's a labor law or whatever. We can provide them with changes around legislation that might potentially affect them. And it's this nexus of the external data and the internal data. Having that ability to leverage something like the Azure cloud gives you the ability to do that. So I'll give you a very simple example. Within our organization, we took the whole of the legal code for the UK, so there's 150,000 documents, and we pulled that into a graph database, and we kind of indexed that. So like sort of 6.5 million nodes. Well, that took a weekend. That took 2 days to do that, right? Now, it's impossible to imagine without the power of something like Azure and those tools that you could do that. Now, that information can directly be interrelated to the matters and the clients that you have in your organization. It's available like that. So it's that nexus, I think, that's going to drive differentiation and improve customer service. And if I look myself as a customer of law firms, and I'm also a customer of accounting practices, I think it's fair to say that the accounting practices are ahead of the law firms in terms of, access to information, portals, visibility, transparency. And that's an opportunity. So for the firm that actually gets that right and starts to really improve in that area and gives that differentiated transparency, I think it can make a huge difference to the customer experience. And that customer experience is going to drive more opportunity. But knowing your customer and being able to correlate what's happening outside of the firm, I think, is a key factor in being able to achieve differentiation and added value.
Yeah, Mike, it'd be interesting to get your point of view, not only as a finance director at a law firm, but also someone who's worked with accountancies and been in the accountancy space in the past. What are your views about some of the things that Stephen's just said about that intersectionality and really, on one side, leveraging the right tech platforms so that your lawyers can be profitable and hit their targets, but at the same time deliver good client service and really find that connection between the two?
Yeah, I think that Stephen's absolutely right about the measures. So law firms tend to focus very much on internal measures, and the external measures kind of don't get quite forgotten about, but they're difficult to get hold of. And as a result, we tend to focus on the easy stuff about the how hard people are working, how much they're billing, that kind of stuff. But actually focusing on where we sit in the marketplace, what our clients are doing, really the types of work that we're doing for those particular, it's much more difficult to get hold of, and therefore it tends not to be looked at in such depth. Whenever we try to look at some of this data, we collect an awful lot of stuff along the way, just as part of the day-to-day activities of the firm. But trying to make sense of some of the data that's not used very often is sometimes quite difficult. Stephen saying what he could do in a weekend would probably take us several years if we try to do it manually. So data quality is sometimes an issue. And therefore, there's a data cleansing exercise that needs to be undertaken before we can draw any real insights from it. And that can sometimes take time, particularly if there's no immediate understanding of the benefits of that data. I'm all for fishing trips just to sort of find out what data we've got and what it tells us. But others want immediate results, and therefore perhaps are less willing to invest the time in trying to get those insights. But definitely the technology is moving at such a pace at the moment. I think it is becoming much easier to get the sort of information that is useful than perhaps there ever was. I think certainly during the during the lockdown, we've seen a need to get information much more quickly. We've moved away from sort of monthly cycles to weekly or even daily cycles in terms of information, and actually looking to see what we're doing as an organization, and where we're making money, where we're not making money, where the opportunities lie. Incredibly important at the moment. So I think that ideally I'd like to see much more external information, really, that we can then marry up with the internal data that we use on a daily basis, just to see really how we're doing, how we're providing the service. I think clients are increasingly looking for certainty over outcomes, looking for certainty over pricing, looking for certainty over costs, and that comes with us being rather more focused on the way we're doing stuff, the way we're delivering our client service, making sure that there is a way to do it. There is a tendency, perhaps, for lawyers from time to time to act in silos. They're almost kind of, rather than one business, we've got, I don't know, 200 businesses running, and actually trying to bring everything together so that we have that united client approach, I think is terribly important.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting, Craig, from your point of view, your data-driven insights is basically your forte. So I'm wondering how can law firms and other businesses really, understand the data that they have and how to use it to the best of their ability?
Yeah, sure, happy to pick that up. So I think both Steve and Mike have touched on this already, but I think it links back to what I mentioned at the start, because I guess quite often when we speak to law firms, they often have the data, but I think it's often locked in different siloed applications in the firm. I think it's fair to say that the majority of law firms, certainly that I've spoken to, and hopefully you will be able to identify this on the phone, have traditionally sort of recognized a business requirement, maybe researched the market, looked at the market leaders, and then pretty much bought off the shelf, often through strict and prolonged RFP process. Sure that rings a few bells. But there is another way, right? So I think there's tools available now that allow you to combine data that you have from different legacy applications at the firm and standardize it. And then when you've standardized that data, you can run AI models over the top and uncover patterns, trends that quite often we didn't know about our own data, or in fact our clients, because do you know what? It's not part of our current standard reporting. It's not part of the dashboard set that we have. It's not what we've always done. So let me give an example. So, maybe, or you have a PMS system, you might be using Elite or Adderant or something along those lines, and it will hold matter information, billing information on the client. We might refer to it as billing records. You're going to have a CRM and you call it client account records. You're going to have a marketing call that calls it marketing records, event management. It goes on and on, right? But ultimately, it's the same thing. We're talking about the same actual client. So what if you can pass these records through a common semantic? This means the same thing. This means the same thing. This is also client. This is also client. And actually, centralize that and then start to uncover data. We tell the AI that it means the same thing, and it starts to run an analytics over the top of it, an insight. And I think importantly, I've just referred to internal data. The external data then adds another enrichment on top of that. So, take data. A big one for us at the moment is LinkedIn. To take data from LinkedIn to understand what relationships we've got externally as a firm. How can I benefit from someone else at the firm knowing a client that I don't already know yet? How can I use market trend information to weave back into that single client view? And ultimately, why are we doing this? When we win, why do we win? What are the influencers? What can the data tell us about that? When the region is X and competitors Y, we are closing 80% new client opportunities. How can we replicate that in a different practice area? How can we replicate that in a different region? You know, are our top clients, this is a big one I'm talking about at the moment, are our top clients our top clients? You know, based on engagement and billing history and this pattern we've got of data, you know, which clients have got the biggest growth potential? Based on the current market trends, you know, COVID, etc., you know, which clients are potentially going to need the most help in the next, you know, 6 months, year? So what is the best way for us to then introduce the relevant practice areas at the right time? I think importantly, it's taking that data, that system of record data, and then driving insight that then informs us as the next best action. So we're looking for triggers that give us, you know, this is something that you should be aware of, and actually here's something that you should do on the back of that. So it's taking the data, running intelligence, and then driving the next best action. And that really is kind of top of mind for an awful lot of the firms that we're speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can sort of add an extra nuance to that, and it's something picking up on something that Laila said when we were having a kind of preamble to this discussion, which is that there's a feeling that because there is such a disparate solution profile within organizations, you've almost got to kind of rip out the plumbing and start again to be able to achieve any of this stuff. And in the past, because the integration tools and so on were much weaker, that was true. But that's not true anymore. You know, Microsoft has a great marketing phrase: "We can meet you where you are," and that, you know, that is something which is absolutely possible in a data sense, as Craig was just talking about now, but also in the sense of a UI, right? So, you know, UI, user interface, is incredibly important in the legal industry. It's possible using the tools such as the Power Platform that Craig was talking about to put a UI which is consistent across the top of all of these tools. So we're doing that now for a well-known firm who has, you know, Elite, Usual Suspects, InfoHive, Intap, and so on. We're creating a front end which is basically what we're calling the hub, and that hub will stay consistent. Now, ultimately, as the back end starts to change, what's going to happen is that the legal professionals are not going to see that, because this layer is sitting in between of the data, and we're interacting with that data, and then that data layer is interacting with the applications behind. As potentially the applications themselves change and migrate perhaps to a new platform, the level of disruption that the fee earners have is not there anymore. And that's the biggest challenge that we see, is this inertia that comes out of you know, the pain of doing major upgrades and the data migration and everything that goes with that. So I guess the message is, you know, there is a different way, which is more of an evolution than a revolution, and the technology platforms of today really do facilitate that. Now, you know, I think it would be naive to say that it doesn't require an effort. Clearly, it does require a significant effort, but ultimately, the prize is such that it justifies, you know, making that effort. I would submit anyway.
Just from your point of view on some of the things that Stephen has pointed out, in the preamble to this, we kind of talked a little bit about your experience working in-house and working at Deloitte, and I'm wondering how your journey with using technology in different companies and now being in-house, how you're finding those, what were those challenges before? How are you finding solutions to those challenges? And I guess now that you're in the retail sphere, how's your approach to technology and changed and working with law firms changed?
So I think, you know, from my experience at Deloitte, it's quite a dynamic firm where, you know, if we are promising to upgrade your technology as a client, you know, we were internal looking as well. I think technology there, we had much bigger teams. So, you know, the external spend was a lot smaller, and, you know, using technology we would rely on the existing, you know, enterprise solutions that we had in place, and actually we could derive a lot of benefit out of them. So it's not just using it solely to time record, it's sort of having a look at that data and then identifying trends so that we could quite early on spot where things potentially could go wrong. You know, that this was budgeted for X amount and it's gone over by this much. You know, somebody pick up the phone, find out what's going on a project. it's taking quite a boring sort of standard technology platform, but actually using it in a more efficient way. And it's not always about buying something shiny and new and the latest thing on the market. It's looking at what you've got and making sure that you derive the right benefit from it. So I think, you know, the other side of that, where I am now, and understand, you know, what is the benefit of technology? Well, actually, you know, I'm a sole general counsel. So for me, it's about doing things quickly, you know, obviously cost efficiently for my side, but also getting high quality advice. So I do want it all, and I want it all quickly. And how can law firms provide that to me? You know, there's a lot of repeatable, quite standard work that we do. So a lot of it's commercial contracting. You know, how can a law firm enable me to do that in a quicker way? But with the value add aspect, you know, and that's based on what we've talked about, looking at data, insights from that, but also, you know, what kind of tools do you have in place that you can get through some of the churn quicker, so that I can focus on the more important aspects of it and, you know, and take advice on that. And there's also, you know, the element of, you know, complying with legislation like GDPR, lots of things around, you know, DSAR, subject access requests. You know, these are real time consuming work that I don't have a team of paralegals to look through. So I would always go external for that. But, you know, paying the amount that you pay for quite a manual task, you do start to question, you know, how can law firms do this in, you know, a much quicker way using technology? You know, and I have seen some that use platforms where they can sift through data quite quickly, but it still requires, you know, a manual review at the end of the day. And I do think that's an area where absolutely we should be using much more automation, and different, you know, different ways of dealing with it, and, you know, repeatable work. It's about then showing those efficiencies to us as a client, but then as a law firm, taking out all the data and showing, you know, what value can we add here? So whilst we understand we've done 100 contracts for you, this is where we think your main risks are. It's that added layer that I think is currently missing. So it's very much, you know, a project by project. And I appreciate that everything is looked at in isolation, and, you know, every case is slightly different to the next. But there are always things that every firm is doing that's absolutely repeatable, and that you can identify where you can do it in a much more cost-efficient way, cost-effective way, manage your risk better. And it's that oversight that I think is missing, and what I would like to see more of now. And then also the back end of it. So once, you know, if it's a big negotiation that's over, what could a law firm do now to help us manage our risk going forward? How do we manage that third-party supplier? You know, what contract management practices do you have in place? And that's where I think technology really does help.
Yeah, and changing the focus away from necessarily solving problems, but being proactive to prevent things happening, right? And yeah, being more forward looking. I think as well, you talked about this, you know, the ad hoc approach. One thing that I think is very important when we're thinking about this is to have an overall strategic framework at a leadership level. You know, I don't believe that the IT function or the technology function in law firms has the level of status that it needs to moving forwards. I think that you know, you really need to engage your technology leadership within your firm at a much more strategic level, and have a vision in mind of what the to-be state looks like. So yes, of course, you're going to have to be tactical. You're going to have problems that confront you, but rather than just solving them purely piecemeal, you can solve them in a piecemeal way, but have an eye on where you're going in terms of the evolution of your future platform. And it's possible to kind of kill two birds with one stone, to move forward in terms of your overall vision and solve the problem in many cases, rather than maybe going down a technology blind alley and then finding later, oh, hang on a minute, that's going to cause us a problem in terms of what we want to achieve in our future vision. And then I would say that the other final thing is the change in mindset now with SaaS applications is, you know, it's not revolution. It's having small point solutions, very rapid time to value, and then improving them incrementally through time, rather than trying to come up with, you know, the grand plan, the silver bullet, that's going to take us from here to where we need to be. It's a matter of chipping away at it in an agile mindset, and using these point systems to solve problems, but with a different view, not just solving that problem, but also thinking about where are we evolving to. And that's where I think the power of something like the Microsoft platform comes in, because it's much more than a set of applications. It's a whole rich platform that can support your strategic evolution as an organization, as well as drive more efficiency and operational benefit. And if you can marry those two things, I think that's what's going to separate the kind of winners from the losers as we look at the kind of disruption that's going to happen in the industry in the years to come.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to, go on, Greg.
No, I was just going to kind of just reiterate some of those bits. I think, hugely another big conversation for the moment is, in order to be successful, you need to kind of, obvious to say, but you need to be set up for success. And while we can recognize that technology is the enabler that will help, it's super important to have a center of excellence and a governance piece that fits around this. That ensures the tech is set up effectively, rather than panicking we've got a requirement, buying this without any kind of real wide strategy. It's making sure that governance piece is there. And then ultimately, helping firms understand the value. I think, we speak to a lot of people that, and I've done some reading recently and some thought leadership, that a lot of people have interviewed some senior people in firms who've said, we absolutely think technology has got a huge part to play in the next 5 years, and committed resources, potentially to do that. But actually, when you look at the number of people that are in role to actually support that strategy, they've identified technology, yes, it's going to do that, but we don't actually have the people in role necessarily to actually execute on that strategy. So when we think, technology is great, but unless we actually build the structure around it, we're not going to really build that innovation that ultimately will drive the profitability. So I think it's really key to set up for success from the ground up when we're looking at this, wider strategy. But certainly the platform element, instead of a point solution, is open up a lot of doors, definitely.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from your perspective, Mike, just to point on some of the things that Stephen and Craig have mentioned around the importance of tech in the law firm. Historically, the IT role wasn't necessarily always on the board of directors, or let alone at a very highly regarded, position in the firm. I think that's changed in law firms now, but I just wanted to know, just from Field Fisher's point of view, what have you seen in that journey? And do you think the pandemic has perhaps accelerated some of that importance?
Okay, so I think you're right. I think that technology is an enabler. Ultimately, though, we're in the business of selling advice, problem solving for clients, and the senior lawyers are incredibly good at doing that. And I think that where the technology helps us is identifying the opportunities, and also in identifying process where we can kind of effectively get rid of some of the basic tasks that Laila was referring to earlier. I think that we need to be careful. I don't think that technology in the short term, at least, is going to replace lawyers. It will only ever be a tool to assist them, and therefore we need to make the technology as easy to use as possible, and really to assist them in providing the best client service they can. I think certainly what we've seen during the downturn is, during this pandemic, has been the benefits of the investment in technology which have been made over perhaps the last 10 years. I think that if we went back to see the last downturn, 2009, had we had the lockdown then that we've been suffering this year, I think business would really have come to a grinding halt. The investment that's been made over the last 10 years is absolutely incredible, and it's enabled people to work remotely in a way that until relatively recently would have been impossible. So it's enabled the business world to continue. It's enabled us to focus on some of the processes. The one that I always refer to is checks. And we've been trying to get rid of checks for an awful long time. But the mere fact that there was nobody around to physically sign them has made life, we've had to find alternative solutions. And we've stepped forward with the use of technology in order to be able to do that. So I think that technology is definitely moving ever more more slowly, I think, into law firms than perhaps we would like, but it's definitely on the way. I think lawyers, by their very nature, are risk averse and have a tendency to challenge any new solution. But once it's demonstrated that it can work and it can provide benefit, there is an acceptance. I think it will be evolution. It's not going to be revolution. We're not going to see a sudden replacement of lawyers with machines that are giving the answers. But I do think that we will see much greater use of the technology to develop process, develop business opportunities, to deal with some of the stuff which, as Laila said, previously took an army of paralegals. We'll definitely see a greater efficiency coming through from it. And I think from a law firm's point of view, one of the things that we need to be careful of is that although the technology can lead to efficiencies, that we don't pass the entire efficiency onto the client, so that we end up destroying our own profits in the process. I think there is going to be a careful balance here between using that technology to improve client service, to improve certainty of income, certainty of outcome, but for the benefit of both the clients and for the firm themselves.
We've got a question from the audience from Paul Hollingworth, who asks, all of these wonderful tools to analyze data trends, but when something like a global pandemic hits, how do you draw conclusions from historic data about where to focus future efforts? One example, which work types and client types are going to produce the most profitable work in the near future? And are intelligent analytic tools found wanting in these scenarios? I think that's a really great question. Craig, why don't you start that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm not convinced I'm going to be able to articulate how we could map trends in the global pandemic. If I'm honest, I probably would be very wealthy if I could do that. But no, I take the point. We build these AI models based on historic data. We train them to look at data that we've got, and they will obviously work on that basis. So when we have a complete change of scenario, there's obviously going to be some retraining that needs to take place. I guess I can talk at it through patterns that we're seeing. Again, I referred to LinkedIn earlier. Just some of the data that we're able to pull out of LinkedIn in terms of now people are working at home and industry's changed and the very nature of the way we work has changed. Just the difference in how people interact with data that's consumed on LinkedIn, the way they're reading data, the way they're posting, the way that they're sharing information, how they're actually contacting clients, how clients are contacting firms. So there is data that is instantly available as soon as people change their pattern of behavior, and it's just intelligently weaving that back in as soon as possible, and then hopefully driving the next best action. I think again we can kind of start to see specific industries and how they're affected. I saw some metrics around legal and software actually in the global pandemic were the least affected industries. If we look at retail and we look at hospitality and all that kind of side of things, all the way through to legal and technology, we were largely unaffected compared to a lot of the other industries. So it's just kind of picking up the new normal as quickly as we can, and then weaving that back into the AI models as quickly as possible. But not easy for sure. I'm not suggesting this is an easy thing.
Yeah, I've got a concrete example. So one of our clients in Portugal, actually, they wanted at the beginning of the pandemic to be able to predict cash receipts moving forwards, and we did a model looking at that, and we looked at we looked at internal factors, right? We looked at historical trends. We looked at how much time the partners were spending on cash collections and the rest of it, and of course when it came to the pandemic, the model was wrong, right? But it's quite interesting that when we started to layer external information onto that model, because Portugal is driven a lot by inward investment, so a lot of people coming in there for golden visas, property investment and stuff like that. When we layered that external information on there, and we looked actually at the amount of time the partners were spending on cash collections, which is a major factor, we were able to predict for Q2 within 2.5% what their cash collections were going to be. The model learned very, very quickly and the main change that happened with the pandemic actually was that the firm spent more time on cash collection, and actually the biggest factor was how much time they spent on that. And partners didn't spend enough time on cash collection. Guess what, right? So, and when they did, in fact their cash balances shot up during the pandemic. They didn't go down. They were at all-time high. So these models, are able to learn and adapt pretty quickly, but it's a model is something that changes constantly. You don't have a model and then that model is going to work, through time. It's like the best laid battle plans never survive contact with the enemy. So the minute that you run that data and you see the results, you're constantly changing and tweaking that model. But the fact we were able to get within, I think 2.67% was the exact figure of what their receipts were in the quarter we were trying to predict, shows that it can actually benefit in these very extreme circumstances. And traditional forecasting wouldn't have been able to do that at all, because it would just not be able to take account of the number of factors that need to be taken into account, external and internal. So that's a concrete example.
From your perspective, Mike, I know you mentioned that you went from reporting monthly to reporting weekly or perhaps daily. How has the pandemic changed, I guess, the financial outcome or data analytics that you search or that your internal lawyers ask for?
Okay, so I think that what we are seeing is a greater interest, obviously, in how the firm is doing generally, but we are starting to look more carefully at the types of work that we're doing in the areas that we're busy and the areas where we're not busy. One of the challenges we have, of course, is that lawyers are not, can't switch from one discipline to another quickly, and therefore we have to make sure that we have the right lawyers in the right place to do the work as it comes in. We're tracking work coming in, obviously, on a daily basis, looking at what is being won. No surprise, really, I guess, that the big transactional work is not really there for us, whereas the commercial stuff and the technology work and the contract work that's and employment is doing incredibly well. So I think that what we've been looking at is making the best use of the resources that we have to deal with the work that is coming into the business. There's obviously a huge focus on business development as well, trying to ensure that we bring in as much work as possible. And it's tracking that new work coming in, tracking the activity of the individuals within the organization, but rather than kind of waiting to the end of the month to have a look at it in the sort of traditional approach to management reporting. It's not quite real time, but it's moving much more in that direction, so that we are making decisions faster. We're trying to manage the firm much more actively than perhaps we did in the past, because of it's a fast changing environment. And I think that one of the things that we've been discussing is the sort of the budgeting process, which in law firms tend to be a sort of an annual ritual that you go through, and you create your budget and then you kind of put it on a shelf somewhere and then get on with the real, get on with the day job. But now what we're seeing is a greater focus on forecasting on a monthly basis, looking at how things are going and what impact that might have on the firm over the coming months. So moving to series of rolling forecasts, trying to be more agile, I guess, in terms of the way we're trying to manage the firm.
We have another question from the audience, but I just want to get Laila's perspective on this, about basically how the pandemic has affected profit and finance reporting from the client side. Is there anything, you mentioned how when you work with law firms, you want it to be as efficient and easy as possible. Since the pandemic has hit your sector, is there anything different that you're asking of your law firm about how they price their matters, or how, I guess, in terms of costings and financials on your side, that you really need to get nailed down?
Well, I think that's probably always a consideration when working with externals. But, I think to Mike's point, where the focus has shifted, it might have been on, sort of new development technology initially, but actually overnight it was very much, in the employment sector, we started using terms we never used before, and everybody was trying to quickly get to grips with what that meant. What is a furlough scheme? What does it mean for our people? There's redundancies taking place. It's quite an unfortunate set of circumstances, and with that, increasing claims in that area. Similarly, in the insurance and property arena, especially for a retailer, and things changed overnight. And the government kept sort of putting out their rules, regulations, new ways of working, and we had to quickly adapt. And then the law firms had to get up to speed even quicker. And in some places it happened, in others I think it was a bit of a learning journey, because I don't think anybody was quite aware of what was going on. And it was just making sure that firms can adapt very quickly, get to grips. And this is a stage where, absolutely, it's not about analytics anymore. It's not backward looking. It's, being able to change on the ground and sort of hold the hand of the client as you sort of take that path. All of us are sort of eyes wide open, but not really understanding what's going on. And things can again change overnight. We discovered last week, more regulation, more restrictions are put into place. And I think what I would like to see more of is, again, more proactivity in that space. Okay, I know it's a bit more as we go along, but law firms coming saying, look, this is a new rule, this is what we've seen over here. Just bringing that sort of insight to fruition a lot quicker. And you don't need the technology for that. You just need the expertise. You need to have those conversations, much more collaboration on the ground, and, just stepping up communication. I think the biggest change we've seen is the use of Zoom, the use of Teams, all these applications much more often. That before that it was always, an in-person meeting. And overnight we've had to change that. The courts have had to change that. We had the FCA sort of insurance test case. It was conducted via Skype. It's not something that we've heard of before, but it was also a live stream, so that we could see and watch things unfold as they happened. So I think the law is trying to adapt, but I think we're with the pandemic at the moment. It's everybody's in the same boat. We're all trying. It's day by day at the moment. But in terms of reporting, similar to Mike, everybody's definitely relying on technology now to speed things up. We want to know instantly, how did we do yesterday versus today, especially in these times. Retail, hospitality sector really has taken a hit, so we need to be on top of everything, all of our data, all of our sales, all of our information, employees, and that's where we are relying heavily on everything that's going through our systems.
The next question from the audience asks, are there steps the panelists are taking to help individuals, lawyers and other, in their teams make better use or understand the importance of data that they could be using day to day? How much upskilling has happened or ideally still needs to happen? Mike, why don't you take that one?
Okay, so we have a very active, very busy IT training team who are putting on training sessions literally every day for lawyers. Clearly there is an element of horse and water here. We can put on the courses, we've got to get people to attend them though. But interestingly, we are seeing a definite uptick in interest in individuals to wanting to understand how the technology can help them. We're seeing greater use of sort of software tools. Contract Express is one that we're looking at quite closely at the moment, trying to improve the quality and the speed of production of certain types of document for the benefit of both the lawyers and for our clients. So we're definitely seeing an uptick, but where I think in terms of use of data, the real challenge is obviously the reliability of the data we got in the first place. That's key, and making sure that the data is clean, which is about people inputting stuff correctly in the first place. But then I think there are those who have a genuine interest in looking at patterns, looking at data trends, and they're working with us to try and improve the kind of the outputs that we're producing. And there are others who are just consuming it. And I think there are just a variety of different individuals and within the organization and their approach to using the technology and to using the outputs from that technology. We've had some great ideas come through from some of the staff members in terms of what we can do as a firm. We're seeing, as I said, we've having moved into lockdown and having everybody pretty much working from home, there's had to be a change in the way that people behave, the way they work, and it's all gone incredibly smoothly, which is fantastic. And I think that says something to the commitment of the individuals who are trying to do their best, both in terms of developing their own careers, but also providing that client service as well. So you know, we're very pleased with the way that the firm has embraced the technology, embraced the change. Is there more to do? Yes, of course there is. And I, for one, am very keen on really developing the systems we have, developing the knowledge we have. And as Stephen knows, we're working very closely with him in terms of trying to deliver on some of that vision. I'm particularly excited about the hub solution, which Stephen's described.
Stephen,
Yeah.
not only as a supplier to law firms and working very closely with their teams, but also internally, how have you been upskilling your teams to better engage with law firm clients?
Ourselves. Well, as I mentioned in my sort of preamble before I introduced Craig, you know, it's frightening how quickly the platforms and tools and stuff are developing right now. And the way that we approach that is we take this kind of center of excellence approach. So we'll create a small group, we'll get them deep in that technology area, and then we'll use them to kind of incubate the wider organization, because people just can't be over everything all of the time. And it's much more efficient to learn in a group where you can interact, even if it is a virtual group. You can spark off each other. We find that much more efficient. Doesn't have to be a huge number of people, a handful of people, but very important that there is a group, there is learning. There's a little bit of peer pressure in there as well to get up to speed. So yeah, I think with new technologies, it's a question of kind of making sure that you do focus a number of your team members in a particular area to make sure that they keep up with that. Those tools and technologies. I would say something else as well I think is very important. It comes back to my earlier point about the strategic leadership. I think it's very important that the senior leadership in law firms takes the time not to get into the nitty-gritties, not to understand things at a deep level, but to understand what the trends are and the major trends in technology, and to try and almost kind of do a bit of blue sky thinking about what those tools and technologies could do for them, and to challenge their vendors, right? To say, you know, hey, is it possible using this technology that we could, I don't know, better improve our skills management, or we could price better, or, you know, I think sometimes the leadership in law firms could be more proactive and push their vendors and get out there and say, hey, you know, have a vision for what might be possible. I think that could definitely be transformational in terms of how vendors are able to engage with the firms, because it's not just about having the team members enabled in those technologies that are already implemented. It's also about the leadership having a vision for what is possible using those technologies, and using their vendors to provide a kind of window to some of those possibilities.
I think this leads nicely into the next question, just to wrap this off in our last 5 minutes. We've talked a lot about the intersectionality of tech and profitability, but what about the hype? So, you know, we do a legal IT landscapes research every year, mapping the trends of different technologies across the sector. AI and automation have always been kind of a buzzword, and some people have argued that we've kind of gone to the other side and really starting to see outcomes for that. I'm wondering from everyone here today, what are your tips and tricks for auditing technology, understanding your challenges, and really going out to market and figuring out what solutions are out there, as a general overall arching theme, to basically find solutions. Mike, as a law firm and someone who has multiple technologies, how do you approach going to market?
Okay, so I think the challenge we have is really, to Stephen's point, having a clear strategy as to what we're going to do with the technology and why we might be interested. I think, as I've said before, there are all sorts of technology solutions out there that can solve problems I didn't know I had. And I think it's very easy to get sucked into, we'll have this bit of kit and we'll have that bit of kit and together they'll do this and what have you. I think it's been clear on what it is we're trying to do. And every member of the organization has a problem that they think they can solve with technology. And I think we just have to try and rein it in and be clear on what our key objectives are. I think that underlying it, though, interestingly, I think law firms are very, very conservative, and change is slow. And I think adoption of new technologies can also be slow. And once that technology is adopted, though, I think it works very well. And you've only got to look at the way that law firms have developed over the last how many years in terms of particularly the Microsoft stack. Where would we be without Word and Excel? The firms just simply wouldn't be able to operate. So the firms have made huge investments in the past, but I think that evolutionary change is quite slow. And as I said, the biggest challenge, though, is trying to avoid the temptation just to bolt additional bits of kit on with the hope that they're all going to work. And I think it's trying to keep it simple, trying to keep that single data set together so that everything, as Craig said, everything kind of is interlinked, everything talks to each other, I think is so terribly important.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about hype, AI is actually one of my pet hates, this idea of artificial intelligence. And we have, there's an AI fallacy, isn't there, that these tools are going to replace the lawyers, and even when people think about how they leverage AI, that they think in a very narrow sense. At the end of the day, machine learning is just statistics and algorithms. And I prefer to think of it in terms of augmenting what you're doing already, right? If we think about augmented intelligence, that's a much more sensible paradigm to approach how you can leverage this technology. So you're absolutely right, man. You're never going to replace the lawyer, but can you make that lawyer more effective? Can that lawyer do more with can we amortize the skills of that lawyer more broadly by providing better customer service, providing more insights to our clients? Can we use technology to do that? Absolutely we can, right? So we should think not about artificial intelligence, rather augmented intelligence. And how can we do what we're doing already, but take it to a new level? Yeah. I believe that there's too much hype around this idea of AI and replacing the lawyers and so on, and it's completely overblown, and it becomes almost a barrier to it's perceived as a threat potentially, which it certainly isn't. It certainly prevents huge opportunity for highly skilled individuals to do a lot more in less time and with less effort.
Laila, as a client to law firms implementing these technologies and kind of being on the receiving end of some of that service delivery, what are your thoughts around, I guess, how they can better, choose solutions that would then trickle down to benefit you?
So, I spoke earlier about certain things that law firms, I have seen law firms use that, have benefited us where, they're sort of repeatable work, low value. And I think even seeing that's great because you think, okay, right, they are thinking about this, how it benefits us as a client. But I think, ultimately the advice probably won't change because that is something you cannot replace, that experience for senior lawyer, the insight that they have, sort of going from door to door, client to client. But absolutely the way it's delivered, and the technology doesn't have to be something above and beyond what anybody will understand, but it enables a delivery of a message in a more efficient way, a more effective way. Even the increased use of communication tools, collaboration tools, so that you can do live editing, you know, for example, sort of contract maker tools. You know, we are seeing the technology is starting to come, and I think law firms are starting to see the benefits of it. You know, I think some choices have been better than others. I've been on the receiving end of some odd choices, you know, where it's actually become quite clunky. So they, you know, they'll say, we'll use this storage tool, when it takes so long for me to figure out and sign up and, you know, gain access to it, that I think it actually would have been a lot quicker if we just sent it via email. So I think it's, you know, to Mike's point earlier, and I think even Stephen's, it's a strategy behind it. You know, take a step back, think about what the end result is. You know, who does it benefit? Does it benefit us internally? That's great, but does it also benefit our end client? And I think if you take that approach, you know, hopefully you'll get to a place where the tools that are selected, you know, they're all rounders. It's not just, you know, quick fix, tick box activity where, you know, we've got a tool that's fixed one element of a problem.
Craig, I just want to get your final thoughts as well as we wrap up the session, just around a bit about choosing technology and I guess driving better outcomes from data and just leverage.
Happy to. I mean, you know, I think at the start I kind of called out for the moment forget technology, and I think that is important. What we're really proactively trying to do at Microsoft with our customers is build a strategic partnership. So rather than saying we need this bit of technology, let us in on what your strategic roadmap is as a firm. What do you actually want to achieve? What do you want to achieve for your clients? And actually, if we've got insight into that roadmap, we can then say, well, the technology we've got now would help you achieve that, or this innovation is nearly landing and this will also help. So it's kind of a, you know, a real partnership effort that allows you to be informed on what the latest is, but ultimately how that latest technology maps into your strategy as a firm. I think that's really important. So rather than being a kind of vendor supplier relationship and, you know, just bring us in at the last minute for an RFP, we're really trying to kind of have that partnership approach, and, you know, that's really working quite well at quite a few customers now.
Well, thanks everyone. I think Stephen, if you have any final, we've talked all about a lot. I think we've covered exactly what was needed on this agenda, and law firms will have many more, I think, challenges going forward. What are your thoughts about some of the things we've spoken about today?
Look, I think we're at a tremendously exciting time where you know, these tools and technologies are coming to a point where they really can be transformational for the legal industry, and I would encourage law firms to think about technology much more strategically, because there are going to be winners and losers out of this process, and you know, it's not going to be with this paradigm of just operational efficiency that's going to separate out the winners from the losers. That would be my final point.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. It was a great conversation. And just to remind you that this is in the run-up to our bigger 5P event happening on the 9th and 10th of November, our first year doing virtual, so please join us. We have 2 days of a great agenda packed. So just dip in when you can, and it'd be lovely to have you. Thank you again to Stephen James, our CEO, Group CEO and founder at sa.global, our sponsor for today. And of course to Craig Bird, Business Application Specialist at Microsoft. Thank you, Mike Giles, Finance Director at Field Fisher. And thank you, Laila Aslam, the General Counsel and Company Secretary for Waterstones. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.